Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of FA Live. My name is Caitlin Brower. I am the Director of Public Relations, Social Media, and Events here at First Advantage, and I'm also your host of FA Live. So we have a great episode today. We have a timely episode today. So all of the information we are sharing today, very timely, got to get ahead of it. So happy that my guest today is Chuck Walker, Senior Advisor for Public Safety, and our topic is OSFI guidelines, managing compliance requirements, and staying ahead. Chuck, again, timely topic today. So thank you for joining us. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself and share a little bit about your role to our audience?
Sure. Thank you, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. I've been with First Advantage and formerly Sterling for about 11 years now. Prior to that, how I find myself in this role is my background is with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I was with the RCMP for 32 years, and some of my final roles at the RCMP were very relevant to the space that we occupy. I was the Director General of the Canadian Criminal Real-Time Identification Services when I retired, which is the National Repository of Criminal Records for Canada, and I also held Director General role for CPIC, the Canadian Police Information Centre, which is the National Police Computer, which is also in the Canadian context very relevant to criminal record checks and local police information checks. So I manage a bunch of relationships with our police partners. I oversee our standard operating procedures on how we process criminal record and police information checks. And I try to provide support and subject matter expertise in those areas. So that takes me sort of into the regulatory area quite often when there are regulatory developments or legislative developments that either impact our operations as a third-party background screening company, or affect our clients. So in the case of today's topic, which is OSFI and its guidelines, this is directly relevant to financial institutions in Canada, the federally regulated financial institutions, many of whom are valued customers in Canada. So we, as a third-party provider to the FIs, are obviously interested in assisting with OSFI requirements, helping to interpret those, and also provide insight into how we can support our FI customers in the context of the parts of the OSFI guidelines that apply to what we do.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely be providing that assistance and support and guidance today as we walk through the contents of today's episode. If you're watching live on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, if you have any questions throughout the show, you can go put them in the comment section across these platforms, and I'll get them over to Chuck as I see fit. So let's open our conversation with just some context and regulatory drivers here. So Chuck, what promoted the release of OSFI's new security guidelines?
Well, I think in general terms, it just has to do with the fact that the banks and the federally regulated financial institutions are a very important piece of infrastructure, critical infrastructure to Canada. And the superintendent of financial institutions is an officer of Parliament. He or she is accountable to the Minister of Finance. And so the expectation is as a regulator, OSFI will look at the state of the world and introduce new guidelines from time to time to give FIs frameworks, against which they can be measured to ensure that they're compliant. It's about keeping the financial institutions sound and maintaining their integrity. So OSFI's guidelines touch on a whole bunch of things. For our purposes, we're mainly interested in the people stream, but OSFI guidelines touch on other things like business continuity and data security, and other aspects that would obviously be important to having a resilient and secure financial sector. So that's the driver behind what OSFI does, and I think they have the challenge of keeping up with everything that's happening. Use AI as an example, cybercrime generally. There are lots of things that would require OSFI to review its guidelines from time to time and update them as they see fit. But even as things evolve and we're confronted as society with all kinds of interesting challenges around technology, really as a background screening company, and what I find interesting based on my previous life as well, is that really one of the largest threats to the integrity of any organization are its people. Either intentionally or inadvertently. Often when we hear about things like data breaches and other issues, malware attacks, etc. Quite often there's a human element there. So screening remains as an essential, important risk management activity that should be paid attention to. And I think that OSFI, in its role, obviously has released guidelines around people along with the other aspects.
Yeah. So I want to move now. It was a good way to set the stage and kind of provide again some of the context there of why it came, a couple of the risks that we're looking to address. Like the chunk of our conversation today is really around what you just brought up: screening standards and requirements. So how should financial institutions define and identify responsible persons?
Yeah, well, again, I mean, the reading I've done of the OSFI guidelines, they make it fairly clear that responsible persons in their context, in their direction, is people at the director and manager level. But it's interesting, we recently had a sort of a collaboration with customers in Canada at a meeting, and we had quite a conversation around responsible persons and what that term means to our various FI customers and how they see it being applied. And I think there are different lenses that you can apply. Perhaps what is in the OSFI guidelines could be treated as a minimum standard of making sure that managers and directors are treated as responsible persons. But there are a lot of opinions and shared points of view that really anybody who's touching financial systems in a bank and dealing with customers' PII could be viewed or deemed to be a responsible person. If you take a broader interpretation. I know as a customer of a bank myself, I would like to think whoever I deal with at my bank is a responsible person.
Right.
They have my PII. They have access to the banking systems. I would argue that anyone, not much the same as our organization, everybody who works at First Advantage has been screened and is held to a standard, regardless of their role. And that's been my professional experience too, working in the federal sector. Is that there is a minimum standard of screening. And it's interesting because the OSFI guidelines even make a link to enhanced reliability, which is the name of a level of Government of Canada security screening, and it lists 5 elements. In fact, that's what first caught my interest in these OSFI guidelines, because one of the elements obviously is a criminal record check. But what's interesting is that in the federal government context, as it has been for many years now, a criminal record check means a fingerprint-based check. So that was my very first question for OSFI, and they were quite good to respond. Do you mean that these should be fingerprint-based checks? And they responded and said, no, they can be name-based, but they're using that Government of Canada standard of enhanced reliability as sort of a goal to shoot for. And those elements include a criminal record check. They include a credit check. They include employment and education history verifications, and they include references. So it's a fairly fulsome check. It's far more than just a straight crim check.
Well, let's go into that a little bit more, that final thought you just had. Why then is a recurring screening cadence essential? And then what are the best practices for setting that right frequency?
Yeah, and this is it's a big question because it has some administrative overhead to it for customers. But I will tell you that a cadence is a good idea. I think a one and done approach to criminal record checks is, well, it's better than nothing. People should be reminded that it is a point in time check, and people's situations can evolve and change. They can come into adverse contact with the criminal justice system, but the only way that you're going to know that is, well, not the only way, but a good way to know that is to run checks at a regular cadence that is determined by the customer based on their risk tolerance. Could also be based on the employee's role or function changing, or the fact that they maybe work in a sensitive aspect of the enterprise that would warrant a more constant monitoring of their status with respect to criminal record or police information. So it's a conversation that has to be had one-on-one between customers and, in our case, third-party providers. But it absolutely makes sense to look at a cadence, and in fact, the OSFI guidelines make that very point, that there should be a cadence, and there could also be trigger points like changing roles, for example.
Is there any additional steps that these institutions can take, kind of going beyond what you had just mentioned?
Well, I think that there's an inclination to do a straight criminal record check, which is it's fine. It's certainly, as I've said, far better than nothing. And look, in Canada, we're fortunate because we really have one source of criminal records. It's a fairly simple environment in that we don't have, to use the U.S. as an example, we don't have 50 state identification bureaus, all of them with some level of agency and autonomy over what they share at the federal level to the FBI. Here, it all rolls up into one national repository, and it always has. So, and through our police partner agencies, we're able to very efficiently query and search that repository. However, we'll share a little more information on this at the bottom of the call here. But what I think consumers need to understand is that you can have a criminal conviction in Canada and not have a criminal record because of the way the laws are. And we could do a whole webinar on that. So I won't get into a lot of detail on it, only to say that it's an aspect of all of this that is worth taking a little bit of time to understand better. Because if you're trying to manage risk and you understand the difference between a criminal record and a criminal conviction, then you can make informed decisions about what else you might want to do around seeking an enhanced police information check, which is readily available through First Advantage or through the industry. The term that's actually growing more recognizable, and one that I like because it's tied to actual legislation, which is legislation the province of Ontario introduced in 2018. It's called the Criminal Record and Judicial Matters Check, which I think is a great term because it aptly describes what is made available through this more enhanced option, which we can provide. And the good news is that it has no impact on turnaround times to get the answers, and for a very reasonable cost increment. The customer is doing a much more comprehensive check. And to bring it back around to OSFI, OSFI has the ability and the mandate, in fact, to I don't know if audit would be the right term to use, but they certainly will check for compliance with their guidelines. And I think it positions an FI really well to be able to say that, well, not only are we doing what OSFI requires. But in fact, with the criminal record judicial matters check that a customer can opt for, you're doing much more, and that's easily demonstrable by the difference between those two levels.
Well, going off of that check that you had just stated, inside the guidelines, they mentioned the Government of Canada's enhanced reliability check. So can you walk through some of the differences there so our audience can get a better understanding?
Well, yeah, like the enhanced reliability requires a criminal record check. And as I mentioned, that piqued my curiosity because
Sure.
I said, well, is this fingerprint based or name based? And they responded, OSFI said, no, it can be name based. So that was great. So nothing really changes in that respect. But then they talked about, the fact that an enhanced reliability check also includes more background checks. So there's a reference dimension to that. So it's more of an investigation in the sense that, and you're also verifying somebody's employment history. And we're seeing this, and we're actually working with some of our FI customers now around dealing with resumes that are fictitious. So actually verifying the legitimacy of a listed employer on a CV is an area where we are developing pretty robust processes that have seen good success and traction with some of our FI customers. Education verification is another thing that we provide, that we've been doing for many years to ensure that somebody has the education credentials that they claim. And then references, and I think we all understand what references are. So and credit history. So that's the 5 that make up enhanced reliability. And that's what OSFI is talking about as a good standard to apply. So I think based on what I know, and I'm not a salesperson or account manager, but based on what I know, I think that there's lots of opportunity for FIs to pick a la carte from the services that we provide and bolster their screening program to include many of those elements.
Chuck, real quick, the check that you had mentioned before, what is the official name of it? Someone didn't catch that on LinkedIn.
So we have called our check for a long time an EPIC, or an enhanced police information check, which is basically made up of 2 search processes our police partner agencies are allowed to perform per federal policy. One is the criminal record check, and the other is a check for other judicial matters, which can include a lot of things. And what's interesting about those things is that they're things that are active. So while you could find a conviction doing a straight crim check, it might be 20 years old. And the relevancy of it may be, subject to, to some conjecture or what have you. But on the other half, on the active judicial matters, these are things that are happening now. Show that this individual is actually actively involved with the criminal justice system. So you're going to find things like pending charges. You're going to find things like arrest warrants that have been issued. Could be bail conditions. These are all entries that are put on CPIC by the police agency of jurisdiction where that individual is before the courts. And it's done for the purposes of law enforcement. However, it can be disclosed with the applicant's consent for purposes of background screening. And a lot of it's very relevant. If somebody's currently charged, for example, with a violent offense, and it's awaiting disposition in the courts, that's information that is public record. And that's an important thing to emphasize, because we get into these conversations, well, if it's not an actual conviction yet, can I or should I consider it, or am I allowed to? The simple fact is that if you knew which courthouse to go to, any member of the public could obtain the information that we're talking about here. It is a matter of public record, except for in those very rare instances where a court seals the record, which effectively happens very seldom. So probation orders, conditional and absolute discharges that are still within the disclosure period of 3 and 1 year respectively. So there's a lot of stuff there that.
Someone just asked about civil charges.
No, civil charges, no.
Okay, someone just asked that.
Yeah.
Good.
This is all in the realm of police information and criminal records. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone who's, working in the chat here. We appreciate the engagement. Again, if you do have questions, please pop them in. So moving on, Chuck, are there risks for financial institutions relying on immigration admissibility thresholds?
Yeah, there is. And that's another, resource that we want to point the audience to at the bottom of the call. I mean, anyone who's living in Canada knows that, our government has very actively encouraged immigration for a lot of great reasons, and not the least of which is what new Canadians bring to the country. But I think there's a misconception on the part of some employers that if somebody has been deemed to be admissible to Canada, that effectively you're good to go around screening for, and we'll use FIs as the example. A walk through the Criminal Code of Canada and IRPA, what they call IRPA, which is the Immigration Refugee Protection Act. So that's another federal statute. And that's the law that basically, among other things, speaks to admissibility. So if you're coming into Canada as an immigrant, there's two streams. So you can come in as an immigrant or come in as a refugee. If you come in as a refugee claimant, things are different again, because if you're seeking asylum, one of the things that the law requires to be considered is the risk of sending you back from wherever you came from, and what risk that could entail for the individual. So any criminality that individual may have had where they came from is not the primary consideration in the case of someone seeking asylum. So just set that aside for a moment. But talking about immigrants, which is by far and away the stream that's most relevant and is most used, what IRPA says is that if you have been convicted of a crime in the country in which you came from that has an equivalent in the Criminal Code of Canada where the sentence would be 10 years or more, or you have several crimes that would be deemed in Canada to be indictable offenses, and I'll explain that term in a moment, then that's the threshold for inadmissibility. But the way the criminal code works in Canada is you really have three types of crimes, we'll say. And I mean, we all watch TV and we hear felony and misdemeanor, which are US terms. But in Canada, what you have is you have indictable offenses, which would be the equivalent of a felony. You have summary conviction offenses. And then there's this band in the middle, summary conviction being like misdemeanors. And then there's this huge tranche in the middle that are called hybrid offenses or dual procedure offenses. And what's interesting about them is that the Crown at some point in the arraignment process will elect whether to proceed by indictment or proceed summarily. And that often determines the punishment that someone would get upon conviction. These hybrid offenses tend to carry maximum sentences of less than 10 years. Mm-hmm. So from an IRPA standpoint, they would not, an equivalent from a country of origin would not cause that person to be inadmissible. And there are a plethora of them that are definitely relevant to FIs, like fraud, like theft, like falsification of documents, falsification of records, insider trading, the list goes on. So the cautionary tale here, I suppose, is that if you're relying on the IRPA thresholds with new Canadians that you're hiring, and you've derived from that a level of confidence that anything that would be germane or relevant to FI operations has been covered through the admissibility threshold of IRPA, then you're mistaken. And there's there's a lot there to know about. So again, we're happy to provide information on that point.
Someone on LinkedIn has a question around references. So with the requirements, including professional and personal, are we considering adding personal references to assist the companies trying to meet this requirement?
Well, I don't know that I'm the right subject matter expert to talk about references other than we provide them.
Yeah.
But I know that we have lots of folks that can help our customers determine, the right package for them.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So we can definitely follow up. I know that question comes from Jamie. We can definitely follow up with you after the show today for specifics on that question. So Chuck, what happens if OSFI regulated organizations do not comply?
Well, again, I've had it said to me recently by some of our FI customers that the superintendent has the authority to basically come in and take over the management of the institution. I don't imagine that any FI would want that outcome to occur. I would kind of. To me, it sounds like it's along the same lines of a business going into receivership almost, Yeah. They have those authorities. The superintendent definitely has those authorities. So compliance is important. And I think that, while there's many aspects to the OSFI guidelines, and the only one that we're really talking about here is how to help with your people and your hires. And, but that is not a small piece by any means, in my view. It's really important to have a third-party provider that can look, if you choose to outsource any aspect, to work with a partner that you can have full confidence in. And we'll expound on this a little bit more, but when an FI outsources anything, whether it's data storage, business continuity, or in our case, onboarding, the screening aspects of onboarding, they're transferring risk, that's a normal business practice, and that's fine if it's informed and an educated decision. But the point that OSFI brings home is you can transfer risk, but you can't transfer accountability. So, ultimately it's on you as the FI. So, we invite and encourage that an FI, because they are expected by OSFI, to really kick the tires on their third-party providers. And, we're happy to go into great detail about what we do at First Advantage to ensure that, we are a reliable third party.
Well, that is great, because that is where I wanted to go next. I did want to talk a little bit about the data privacy and technology implementation. So do these guidelines, what are the requirements to ensure that these third-party vendors are meeting adequate privacy and security standards?
Yeah, I don't know them to the granular level, but I would say that in general terms, OSFI would expect that any third party that an FI is working with would have applied to it the very same standards as the FI would internally to itself. So let's just talk about our teams and our people and what we do around our own people who handle all this PII on behalf of our customers. What are they expected to do? Well, they're screened. Obviously, we screen to a standard, a good high standard, and we train, and we repeat training. So our employees get regular training, myself included. There's no exceptions on the proper handling of PII, on global compliance requirements, on anti-corruption, all manner of conduct, code of conduct. I don't know how many training offerings, both the pre-acquisition and today, and they're both very similar. that I routinely undergo, and I know that everyone else in the company does as well.
Yeah.
Our systems are locked down. In the context of Canada, because of federal policies around criminal record checks and everything, our PII resides in Canada. That's an RCMP requirement. So there's lots of questions that can be asked around compliance when you're working with a third party, and we encourage those questions to be asked. We want to be an extension of the same standards that the FI would place on themselves.
Yep. All right, let's move into implementation now. So, what do you foresee the challenges that financial institutions might face when operating under these new guidelines?
Well, again, I'll confine my comments to people screening. I find a lot of the guidelines interesting when they talk about business continuity and other things. Your computing services, your data storage, it's all interesting. But in terms of people screening, I think the active discussion is around responsible person and how we know how OSFI interprets it, but I get the sense that the financial institutions may have opinions or hold the view that the term should be applied more broadly, and we can absolutely help with that. I think other challenges are around cadence for rescreening and how best to manage that. There's some administrative aspects to that, and there are also probably some privacy aspects in that the individual obviously needs to know. It has to be clear-eyed, and they have to know that they will be rechecked from time to time. So all of this has to be built into a robust policy that we can certainly provide advice on. We can help to answer questions around how best to operationalize processes like rechecking cadences. We do it often. In the end, it's a collaborative thing, and there's really three legs to the stool. There's us as the provider of the service. It's been my experience with our customers that there's the HR department that's constantly has the challenge of getting people through the door, and butts in the chairs, as they say, because that's just the nature of the beast. You have to deal with turnover, and their HR departments are under pressure to provide talent to their organizations. And then there's sort of there's a collaboration and also a bit of a healthy tension between the corporate security group within any customer, FI customer, where they have a slightly different focus, and it is around the insider threat and around making sure that not only when those people do come through the door, they're the right people. So those, I think, three elements need to collaborate, and it's been my experience with our customers that those conversations, the dynamics of them and the flavors of them can vary depending on sort of who's at the table. But that's part of what keeps the work interesting. And we want to be a trusted partner to help navigate through that and help to inform those policies, and then help to operationalize them too, to the extent of what we do through our interfaces with both personal and technical with our customers.
A lot of great information shared so far on today's episode. I do have one final question, though. So, what is this underscoring message to these institutions, within the guidelines?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that jumps off the page for me when I read OSFI is this whole notion of the stuff gets outsourced, and that's the way the world works. If it's not your core function, you partner with a provider whose core function it is, so that you can focus on what it is that you do as an organization. But what OSFI's message is when you make those choices and you deal with third parties, just know that you can transfer the risk for that activity or that function that's needed, but you can't transfer the accountability. That rests with the FI, and we feel that we're well positioned to assist FIs to not only help them with their outsource, but also to support them in their accountabilities to OSFI to show that they're managing their risks effectively in the areas that we support. So that's my takeaway from it, and that's my key message to our customers, current and potential, that when you're looking for a screening partner, look to us.
Yeah, that's great. If you are, again, watching live, if you have any final questions for Chuck, please submit them now. As we're waiting for any final questions to come through, Chuck, just would love to get your final thoughts on today's conversation.
Well, the OSFI is an active conversation, and the guidelines, and the meetings that we held a couple of weeks back in Toronto with a number of our customers were they were fantastic. It was such a productive day, and I think it was a very healthy exchange, and I think it sort of opened minds to the possibilities about what kind of collaboration is there. So I think compliance is it's it's maybe one of those topics that people don't treat to the extent that they should, in terms of being very differentiating. If you can show that you're strong on compliance, I think that's becoming increasingly important to people in our society, just because of the way things are. It's not something you can pay lip service to. It's something that should be. It's like privacy. A few years ago, privacy impact assessments became the thing, and then it was privacy by design, and begin with privacy in mind when you design systems and processes and everything. I think this is in the same vein. It's just had its profile heightened, and the good news is that there's lots of ways to get out in front of this, and that's what I'm excited about, is helping with that.
Yep. Well, I think our team is actually going in on LinkedIn right now and adding some resources for everyone to check out. But as always, you can always reach out to, you can reach out to us on LinkedIn. You can reach out to Chuck, and we're here to help. Yes. So with that being said, there are no further questions to come through. Chuck, I want to thank you so much for being on with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yeah, my pleasure. And keep cool, everybody. It's hot where I am, Caitlin. I know it's hot where you are. So
yes. If that's how we end the episode today, it's stay cool wherever you are. And I appreciate, everyone always tuning in live for FA Live or watching us on demand. But we will catch you on the next episode. With that being said, have a good one, and thank you, everyone.
Bye now.